Well, I'm Cheryl Ross. I'm the Next Steps in Discipleship pastor here at Southridge Church. And I want to share a story with you about when I was in high school. So I was a pretty good kid. I was the baby, the only girl, and I learned a lot of lessons from my brothers, okay? But although I didn't do like drugs or drink or other things, I did dabble in a little bit of forgery. I forged excuses and sometimes early dismissal notes. Okay? Confession time. So I did. I got pretty good at it. Don't do this. I see some young people do not get an idea from me. Okay, it's not okay. Because even though I didn't get caught, it was always like a stress and a worry of mine. Okay, but this particular day, I wrote an early dismissal to go to an appointment at the tanning bed. I wanted to go tan. It was like prom season, and I found it relaxing. And although my home life was not that great, and you maybe are like, oh yeah, she needed that time. I understand tanning beds are not great, and I've had some moles removed. You don't need to give me a lecture. I don't do this stuff anymore. I also don't forge anymore, unless it's my husband will give me like the receipt at the restaurant and want me to sign and do the tip. But anyway, that's okay. He knows about that. So this particular day, I went to the tanning bed, left school, did the whole thing. I get there and I walk in, and they're undergoing maintenance. They're changing the bulbs or something, and they're like, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to tan today. We'll give you a free session or two or whatever. And I was like, great. I walk out, and I go and I sit in my car, and I think, what do I do? Like, I can't go home because they think I'm at school. I can't go back to school because they think I'm at an appointment with the doctor. So what do? I go for a drive. It's a beautiful day. I'm like, yes, a drive on the backwoods country roads sounds perfect, right? This was before I had like smartphones like today with GPS and all that, and I had a really old car, okay? So I go for a drive on backwoods country roads. I have the windows down because it's beautiful. I have the worship music cranked up, singing my little heart out. Worship music makes it okay, right? Probably like wow hits or something like that. I'm driving, and everything's great until I look down at the clock. I see what time it is. I see I'm about to run out of gas, too. I'm getting pretty low. And I look around, and I literally have no idea where I'm at. And so I'm like, what do I do? What am I supposed to do? Because I've been driving for 45 minutes in the opposite direction of home, where I'm supposed to be in 20 minutes. Less than half the time. You're doing the math. I know I can't go back the way I've came. That'll take too long. But I begin to think about this side road that I believe is up ahead, and if I make a turn, it'll dump me out on the main road and I can get back a whole lot faster. But I am like sweating. I mean, my hands are clammy. I'm like getting sweaty telling you guys the story again. This is why you don't do stuff like this, guys. But so I make it home, and everything's right. No one's the wiser except for me and God and, the tanning bed people. But so I get home and everything's okay. But my point of that story is that for a little while, I was sweating because I thought I had traveled for too long, too far in the opposite direction of where I was supposed to be, and I didn't think I could make it back. And sometimes this happens in our own lives. I'm not talking about in our cars when we hit a detour or something like that, or forget the GPS, or our phone dies, or whatever. I'm talking about in life. In life, sometimes we end up in a place where we stop and we look around and we realize, I have no idea where I am. I have no idea how I got here. But I can see that I've gone down so far for so long in the opposite direction of where I thought I was going to be, or where I should be, or what I imagined for my life, and I don't know how to get back. It doesn't seem possible. Maybe it's in your marriage, and you've had a lot of miscommunication things, or there's some walls that have been built up over time because of little things here and there that you just haven't worked through, and you think there's no way that we can get the walls back down and come back to a place that we should be. Maybe it's in your job, in your career. You went and got a degree and went down a career path because it made the most sense, but every day you wake up and you dread going to work, and you think, there's no way I can start over now. Maybe it's something like a dream or a desire or a vision that you had for your life, a marriage, kids, a house, and you don't have those things, and you look around and you think, how's it even going to be possible? When we're in those places and those spaces in our lives, often we want to seek a solution. We want to figure out a way to fix it, a way to get back to where we wanted to be or to that place that we thought we should be. We search for some way to make it happen. Sometimes because of our lives, like sometimes it's just that life circumstances force you in the wrong direction, right? And it's really out of your control, but then we want to take control. We want to force our way back to that place or back to that thing or that space, that vision that we thought we would see in our lives. Sometimes we end up settling for less than what's best because we think that's the way. Like there's no way for us to have this, so I'll settle over here. I'll date the guy that maybe I shouldn't because that must be the way. Sometimes we end up doing like what Cicely says in Diary of a Mad Black Woman. Sometimes we hold on to the very things that God himself is trying to tear away. Sometimes we want to hold so tight to that thing. We don't want to lose it. We don't want to let go of it, but we're fighting against God, and we got to realize it's futile, but sometimes it's not meant for us to hold on to. Sometimes we just need to let go. And sometimes we place blame on people, on things, on circumstances where it really shouldn't be. Maybe there's some truth to that. I've experienced a lot of abuse and trauma in my life, and I can say, like, obviously I didn't do things to deserve that. But sometimes we place so much blame that we fail to realize what we could learn, what we could grow in, what we could mature through if we just take some responsibility for some of our own part of going in the opposite direction of where we should. Sometimes we just need to take responsibility and say, you know what, I made a mistake. I messed up. Now let's try to redirect. So in those places and those spaces and those circumstances, we often seek for a solution, but where do we go for that solution? Who do we look to? Where do we look to? Where's the blame? What do we do? We're going to see today in our Rise and Fall series, as we continue going through the book of 1 Samuel, we're going to see David and Saul and how they seek different solutions. They go in kind of opposite directions, not just geographically, but also in what it seems like God had spoken for them and their lives. And we're going to see where they go in this. So you can follow along at src.life/notes or on the screen with me. So 1 Samuel 22, verse 1 and 2 says, So David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Soon his brothers and all his other relatives joined him there. Then the others began coming, men who were in trouble or in debt or discontented, until David was captain of about 400 men. So I have a map to show you because I don't know if you're interested in me. When I was reading through this, I was like, man, he's going all over the place. He is a traveling man fleeing for his life, and I just got to see it, okay? So you see towards the top of the screen, Gibeah of Saul. That's where Saul's hanging out. That's like the royal city, what has become the royal city. And in the previous chapter, David had gone to Nob at some point to see the priest Ahimelech. And then he ends up over in Gath. We learned about this last week, so towards the left in Philistia. Okay, he was where the Philistines were, the Philistine king. He had his little moment of, he's fleeing for his life. That's a normal trauma response, but then he acts crazy. And we heard all about that. In his moment of fear, he decided to act like a crazy person. He leaves there. He ends up here at the cave of Adullam, just below where it says Judah. All right, and I don't know how big this cave is, okay? But you got Dave in a cave, and you've got his brothers and their family, and 400 men. Sounds appealing, right? So, they're all there. His brothers have come. Now, if you've followed along in the story, you saw that when David had gone and the story where he defeated Goliath, we know that his brothers are serving in Saul's army also. So they have left Saul and they've come to David. And then you see these other 400 men have left for one reason or another. They have decided, we don't want to stick around with Saul. They're obviously not okay with the way Saul's running things, with his leadership. So they take off and they come to where David is as well. And they have to realize that this isn't a great circumstance in not location, not hanging out in the dark, dingy cave with all these men, but also the fact that when they come and decide they're going to join forces with David, they are saying that they're going to fight for him. They're going to fight with him. They're saying that they're siding with David, who Saul is claiming to everybody who will listen is out to kill him, when it's the other way around. So there's risk involved. They have to understand that there is risk involved with joining forces with David. But they're looking around and they're saying, look, whatever that risk is, it's got to be better than whatever outcome I'd end up with staying with Saul. It's got to be better. So they come, and David's taken responsibility for them. He's taken responsibility for his family. And now all these men, he's like, yeah, sure, I'll be your captain. He's fleeing for his life, and yet he's taking responsibility for so many other lives. Probably not because he wants to, but because he knows it's the right thing to do. And so we are seeing that God is actually setting him up with a circle of fiercely loyal followers. We learned about the cornermen and the people in his corner a couple weeks ago, but now we're seeing that God is moving things to where David's going to have a circle of people who are going to be there for him and fight for him, but there is risk, which is why we see him do what he does next. In verse 3 and 4, it says, later David went to Mizpah in Moab, where he asked the king, please allow my father and mother to live here with you until I know what God is going to do for me. So David's parents stayed in Moab with the king during the entire time David was living in his stronghold. So David takes his parents and he goes to the land of Moab. Let's look at that map again. He has to travel all the way down through the wilderness, around the Dead Sea, up to Moab. And you might be thinking, why? Well, a couple of reasons. One, he's probably figuring this is out of Saul's reach, okay? They're probably going to be safe in this land, and I won't have to worry about them. If I entrust them to this king and this land, then I won't have to worry about them while I'm doing all this other stuff. But also, if you know anything or if you pay attention to the genealogy at all, we know that this is the land that David's great-grandmother comes from, his father Jesse's grandmother, Ruth, the Moabitess. Okay, so they might possibly have relatives there, or at least Ruth would have been known there. And so he knows this is a safe place. But he's taking his parents there and he's entrusting them in the hands of the king. And this is hard to do because it's really hard to let go of control of the things of the people that we love most. But he knows it's necessary. And so he's saying, look, I'm entrusting their life, their safety, their future to you. But it's this phrase that he says, until I know what God is going to do for me. In that phrase, David is also entrusting his life, his safety, his future, his calling, his dreams, his anointing in the hands of God, the true King. And so I have to ask you, are you willing to place whatever it is that you're struggling with, whatever it is that you think is impossible, are you willing to place it in the hands of the King until you know what God is going to do for you? Are you willing to place your job, your career, your life, your finances, your kids, your spouse, your marriage, your dreams, your desires, your future in the hands of the King until you know what God is going to do for you? You see, another translation even says, until I learn what God is going to do. You see, while we're waiting, there are things that we can learn. There are things that we can do even when we don't know fully what to do on some things. There are some things we can actually do. David is still remaining faithful. He's taken steps to protect his parents and other people, to fortify the cave that they're all at, to make sure, that's why it's called a stronghold, is because it's a place that is fortified against an attack, easily defended against attacks of the enemy. So he's doing things, setting up things in place to be able to withstand that stuff while he's waiting, but he also doesn't fully know what else there is to do yet. Because if we're following along, he still doesn't really know that he's supposed to be king one day. And he has to be wondering, what am I doing? What is all this for? And so for you, though, there are things you can do while you wait. Do what you know, but wait on what you don't yet know. So do what you know. For you, if you're a believer in Jesus Christ and you're trying to wait to figure out what job opportunity is next, or what to do with your marriage, or for a counseling appointment to open up, or whatever that may look like, do what you know. We know we should pray. We know we should read our Bible. We know that in really stressful times, what did the Israelites and even Jesus do? They fasted. But that's something that's lost to us a lot. They also, in that time, would spend time in silence and solitude. This is something that's often very well missed in our lives, and we don't always take time to, but the staff and I, we did this just this past week during our meeting. We took time to just be silent. We incorporated it into our devotion and prayer time, a time where we can just sit and be still and wait on God to speak to us, to teach us, to deposit something within us, to know what he's going to do. So do what you know, but wait on what you don't yet know. So then we see that one day, in verse 5, one day the prophet Gad told David, leave the stronghold and return to the land of Judah. So David went to the forest of Hereth. Okay, I've got 400 men, my brothers, these people who are willing to fight for me, and you're telling me to leave, go back towards where Saul is, closer to where he's at, and I'm hanging out in a forest, seemingly by himself. I mean, that's got to be a little nerve-wracking. Sorry, I just keep thinking about poor Christoph being lost in the woods. So, he's in the woods. He's in the forest, hanging out, possibly by himself, and I don't know if you've been deep in the woods in a place where the canopy is so thick you can't even see the light coming through or the sky. It's dense and dark. I imagine that that's what David felt like, even if not physically, spiritually. You see, in this narration, we're not told what David's thinking or seeing. You can go to the Psalms for that. And if the Psalms are any indication, probably on the right track here. But he's in this place. He's anointed by God. So he knows he's been called for something big, because God just didn't anoint people for nothing. He has gone and pledged his allegiance and fought for the king of Israel. He's not really done anything wrong, but yet he's fleeing for his life. And he ends up having to travel all over the place and hide out in a cave in the forest. And he's probably looking around thinking, how did I get here? Why did you bring me here, God? I mean, I was anointed for this? To be on the run? To fear for my life? To have people think possibly poorly about my reputation, about who I am? Because that's what Saul's doing right now. I mean, he has to be wondering, really, was it all for this? If I was David, I'd probably think, man, I wish my dad hadn't mentioned me that day when I was out working the fields with the sheep. I wouldn't have come in for this, right? I think sometimes in our lives, like when things get hard and difficult and we end up in those places, sometimes we wonder and we think, God, really? All of that for this? This is where you've brought me? This is what you're doing in my life? You either think that or you get to that place and you're so discouraged that you're ready to just throw it all away. Because what's the point? What's the purpose in it all? If it only brings pain and difficulty and chaos. Or what's the point if I do everything right and I still end up fighting against terrible things? Or I still end up not where I feel like I should be. When you look back and you don't even understand how you got there, why, or what to do, it's a hard feeling. And I remember that feeling really clearly. You see, at a certain point in my life, I had just gotten to a place where I didn't think anything was possible. I didn't think the things that I knew had been spoken over me, the things that I felt I was called to would ever happen. See, when I was 17, I told you, my whole life wasn't great. The very people who were meant to protect me and care for me didn't. And so I experienced a lot of trauma and abuse and things. And at 17, my dad passed away. And I began to slowly lose myself because the people that I thought were in my corner ended up not being in my corner. And not only that, but then, church was a huge part of my life. And I knew I was called, but I found out that it wasn't welcomed, at least in the church I was attending. And I didn't know what path to take at that point, because that was all I knew. So I thought, biology, pre-med, I'll go become a doctor, do missions, because surely people in foreign countries won't care that I'm a female or whatever. I don't know. It's just my thinking as a young adult person. So I go to college and I drop out shortly after. I don't even know that I did it the right way, but I made it about a semester. And then I began down a path where I just was living in a way that went against everything I knew. I wasn't doing what I knew was right because I was in that place where I believed lies that said, there's no point because there's no purpose. I felt that I had no purpose anymore. I felt like I couldn't be used by God anymore because I'd done some of those things that I said earlier I hadn't done. But I remember I was sitting in the car with the man that's now my husband. We just celebrated 12 years, you guys. But I was sitting in the car. It was the first night that we hung out by ourselves without our mutual friends. Sitting in the Taco Bell parking lot. We'd gone through the drive-thru, ate our food. We're sitting there talking. And I don't know how, but we get in this deep spiritual conversation, and I look at him and I say, do you ever feel like maybe you've failed God? Like maybe you've just gone too far and you're now not worthy or not able to be used by him. And remember, he looked at me and he was like, "What? No. What? Haven't you heard? Don't you know? He is still jealous for you." And he starts saying these things. He goes, "Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy." And I'm like, he's quoting poetry to me? He's like, "Haven't you heard the song?" And I'm like, "No, what song?" So he's like, "Let me just play it for you." Pops in the CD. Like I said, in 12 years, guys. So he puts it in there, and I am just losing it. Ugly cries. Not all the things. Taco Bell napkins are terrible. But I'm sitting there, and I'm like, this guy's never going to call me again. But I get home that night, and I tell my roommate, I said, "Look, I don't know how or why, but I just feel such a connection." I said, "And if he can be a part of my life for the rest of my life, I'm okay with that, whatever that looks like." I remember saying that, which was crazy because let me tell you, I'd been so broken for so long, heading out in shame, feeling so unworthy. All the things I'd been through, I thought there was no way that I could ever trust a man again enough, ever, to want to be married, spend my life with them, have kids with them. No way. But that night in the car, because I'd had some encounters up until this point, I'd had some really cool moments with Jesus that had begun to let me see that maybe, just maybe, there was some path ahead, but it still wasn't clear to me. I still didn't understand. But that night in that car, I began to see more light through the trees. I began to see that there was possibly a path that I hadn't even envisioned or thought for myself. I began to have a little bit of hope, a little more trust, a little more faith to see that maybe God actually knows what he's doing. And God began to dismantle the rest of the lies that I had been believing for far too long. And I want to ask you today, are there some lies that you have been believing that you need dismantled today? What is it that you have been believing? Have you been hiding out in shame in a cave? Have you been hiding out in the darkness, feeling as though there was no way out, feeling as though there was no purpose or no peace for you or no place for you to be used? Maybe you've been hiding out and you think that you've just been down the wrong path for far too long, and there is no way that you could possibly ever come back from that. Maybe you think you've messed up one too many times for it ever to be turned around, and I'm here to tell you that if you can spark just a little hope, a little faith, a little trust, begin to see the light, begin to see God in that darkness, to know that God is still moving. Because I want to tell you, David was here in this place. And just like him, there are things that we see him do that we can do as well. Because David, he went to God for his solution. He invited God in on this journey, and he takes responsibility for people and things that he doesn't even need to. We see Saul do the complete opposite, grasping for anything and everything, trying to hold on to human power structures in order to stay in a place that God had already told him was not his to hold anymore. Saul went in the complete different direction, so much so that he ends up killing that priest and his whole family. But even in that, God was still working, and I'll talk more about that in the extra point because I know I've had you all a little while, and I'll try to get you out of here. Tune into the extra point on Tuesday. But you see David seek God out because David goes, he knows that God is going to do something. He doesn't know what, he doesn't know when, he doesn't know how, but he knows. He turns to the foundations of his faith that he has had for a long time. And I'm here to tell you that the disciples felt the same thing. You see, because they didn't understand the kind of king that Jesus was coming to be. Because that was God's faithfulness, and the way that God was going to make all things right was going to be through the true King Jesus. But the disciples, when they saw Jesus die on the cross, they thought that Jesus had gone in the complete opposite direction from what they thought he was supposed to do. They couldn't see the path of the resurrection ahead. They couldn't see that that very thing, his death, his resurrection, all of that was actually the thing that was going to be able to set him up as king that could reign both then, now, and forever. They didn't get it. It was dark, both literally and figuratively at the time. They were scared, they ran and hid, but they discovered when Jesus rose from the dead how much it changed. They discovered that God is still at work, moving behind the scenes to accomplish his purposes. And even when you don't feel it, even when you don't understand it, even when you can't see it, even when it doesn't make sense, God is still at work. He is still moving. And through Jesus, Jesus made a way for all things to become new. All things, you guys. Your dreams, your vision, your path forward. He can give you a new path, a new vision, new dreams, things you've never even thought or imagined were possible. He can do that for you, and it's through Jesus. So your solution today, because I'm going to tell you what this text really shows us, or this text shows us that people will often move in often directions when it's a terrible time. During terrible circumstances, people will move in opposite directions and seek extreme solutions, but the solution that is most beneficial, the solution that will be here for you today and forever, that you need to seek out today, is Jesus. Jesus can give you new life. This starts now and lasts forever. So if you don't know him, if you've never surrendered your life to him, if you've never entrusted your life to the King's hands, today is the day. You simply have to believe and say, okay, it's yours. And it might be heavy, it might be hard, it's not going to always be easy, but he'll be with you. And with him, your burden can be light. And so come to Jesus today. If you know him, I want to ask you, what is that thing? That thing that you need to entrust to the King's hands today? Is it your job? Is it your family? Is it your purpose? Your calling? Is it those dreams? Is it your health? What is it that you came in here with that you say, you know what, it's too much for me? I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to entrust it to you, the true King, and I'll wait until I know. Wait until I learn. And while you're waiting, don't forget to spend time in his presence. Don't forget that he is still there with you. Continue to do the things that you know you can do while you wait. But don't pick those things back up until you know